The tension in the congressional hearing chamber was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Judge Amul Thapar sat behind the witness table, his black suit ironed to perfection, fingers pounding against the polished wood as he prepared what he thought would be an easy takedown. Across from him, Judge Marilyn Milian straightened her jacket, her eyes sharp and concentrated like a laser beam dot. What occurred next would leave everyone in the room totally dumbfounded. Dot's PA had come into this confirmation hearing, assuming he could steamroll the young judge from Florida. After all, he was a federal appeals court judge with years of expertise, a legal mind that had decided on innumerable cases. She was only a first-term representative who dared to criticize his record. But Thar had no clue what was coming. The instant when Judge Marilyn Milian opened her lips, everything changed. What she pulled out next didn't simply surprise Thapar. It absolutely destroyed his whole argument and left him scrambling for words he couldn't find. Before we get into this incredible confrontation, be sure you click that like button and subscribe to keep informed on the hottest political battles that are defining America. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. This wasn't just another dull congressional hearing. This was going to become the most talked-about judicial confirmation event in recent memory. Judge Amul Thapar epitomized everything about the established judicial system that many Americans had grown bored with. At 54, he had developed his career as a conservative judge nominated to the federal court under prior Republican administrations. His fans lauded him as a constitutional originalist who followed the law to the letter. His critics perceived him as someone out of touch with contemporary America, especially when it came to civil rights and social justice concerns. Thar's climb through the judicial ranks had been meteoric and meticulously controlled. Born to immigrant parents who had created a prosperous life in America, he regularly talked about his family's trip as proof that the American ideal was alive and thriving. His personal narrative resonated with many conservatives who regarded him as live evidence that merit and hard work could overcome any barrier. But critics pointed out that Thapar's privileged status as a federal judge had protected him from the harsh realities faced by defendants who appeared in his courtroom. Unlike the suffering families that came before him seeking justice, Thapar lived in a wealthy area, took his children to excellent private schools, and traveled in circles where interaction with police enforcement was confined to polite discussions. At charity events, Thapar had a reputation for being caustic during oral arguments, noted for cutting off lawyers mid-sentence and delivering pointed questions that frequently left them stammering. His questioning approach was tough and intimidating, designed to highlight holes in legal arguments via rapid-fire inquiry. He conducted himself with the assurance of someone who had never truly been challenged by somebody he considered his intellectual inferior. His confirmation hearing approach had been devised by a team of conservative legal specialists who had guided scores of judicial candidates through the process. They had prepped him for questions regarding hot-button issues like abortion rights, gun control, and religious freedom. They had devised cautious replies that would satisfy conservative backers while avoiding remarks that may scare centrist senators. What they hadn't prepared him for was someone who would concentrate on the real-world implications of his court rulings rather than abstract constitutional theory. Today, he anticipated more of the same routine questions he had breezed over in previous confirmation hearings. On the opposite side sat Judge Marilyn Milian, a 43-year-old civil rights attorney turned politician who had made waves since coming to Washington. Unlike many of her colleagues who hailed from political families or spent decades climbing the party ladder, Judge Marilyn Milian had fought actual fights in courtrooms throughout Texas. She has represented clients who couldn't afford high-priced attorneys and took on matters that larger firms wouldn't handle. Milian quotations as a backdrop was drastically different from the normal congressional representative. She had grown up in a working-class home where money was always tight, and possibilities were rare. Her parents had worked many jobs to keep the family afloat, and she had observed firsthand how the court system treated individuals differently depending on their economic status. During her years as a public defender, Milian had defended hundreds of defendants who found themselves entangled in a system that appeared structured to penalize poverty rather than provide justice. She had watched talented young people suffer heavy terms for small drug charges, while affluent defendants with superior lawyers walked away with probation for identical crimes. Her shift from courtroom attorney to congressional representative hadn't been smooth. The political elite first regarded her as too inexperienced and too combative for the meticulous dance of legislative politics. But Milian had proved them wrong by concentrating on actual policy work rather than partisan grandstanding. Had spent her first time in Congress cultivating a reputation as someone who did her study. While other lawmakers relied on staff briefings and talking points, Milian personally scrutinized every piece of legislation that came before her committees. She approached politics the same way she had handled law matters, with painstaking preparation and an unyielding concentration on facts. Milian wasn't just another politician asking softball questions for the cameras. She was a former public defender who had gone toe-to-toe with judges precisely like Thapar hundreds of times. She understood their methods, their blind spots, and their flaws better than anybody else in the room. The stakes couldn't have been greater. This wasn't only about whether Thapar would be confirmed to a higher court post. This hearing was about the future course of American justice, about whether the courts would stay divorced from the real difficulties of regular people, or whether voices like Milian's might compel change. Thapar had come prepared with talking points regarding judicial philosophy and constitutional interpretation. What he hadn't prepared for was someone who had really experienced the effects of his court choices. Not as the hearing started. Onlookers could feel the electric tension. Conservative legal organizations had filled the gallery, confident their candidate would easily handle whatever questions came his way. Progressive groups waited nervously, hoping Milian might uncover the issues they saw in Thapar's record. Neither side was prepared for what was about to occur. The hearing began normally enough. Committee members took turns asking anticipated questions regarding judicial ideology and legal precedent. Thapar handled them with seasoned ease, providing slick responses that revealed nothing controversial, while reassuring his conservative fans. Then it was Milian's time. She didn't start with niceties or congrats on his nomination. Instead, she started with a simple inquiry that had everyone in the room sit up straighter. Judge Thapar, your 15 years on the federal court, how many criminal defendants have you sentenced to prison? Thapar's eyebrows wrinkled slightly. This wasn't the standard query about constitutional interpretation he had anticipated. Judge Milian, I don't keep specific numbers, but I've ruled over hundreds of criminal cases throughout my term. Hundreds? Milian repeated, making a note. And of those hundreds of defendants, how many were represented by public defenders versus private attorneys? I think that's not actually important to judicial decision-making. I treat all defendants equally regardless of their counsel. Milian leaned closer, her voice maintaining calm but building urgency. Judge, I spent 8 years as a public defender in Texas. I defended defendants who couldn't afford private representation. So, this subject is extremely significant to me and to the millions of Americans who rely on public defenders. Can you answer it? Thapar squirmed in his seat, evidently unhappy with the way this was headed. I would guess that probably 60 to 70% of criminal defendants in federal court are represented by public defenders, but I don't see how this pertains to my requirements. It relates because your record reveals a definite trend, Milian replied, bringing out a hefty folder. In situations where offenders were represented by public counsel, your sentences were 18 months longer than in cases with private attorneys for comparable offenses. How can you explain that disparity? The room went utterly quiet. Conservative. Fans appeared perplexed. This wasn't in their briefing documents. Progressive activists pushed forward, thinking something major was coming. Thapar's face reddened slightly. Judge Milian, sentence judgments are based on various variables, including criminal history, seriousness of the crime, and federal guidelines. I don't make choices based on the sort of attorney representing a defendant. But the data don't lie. Judge Thapar, Milian said, her voice getting louder. And it gets worse. In drug possession trials especially, defendants with public lawyers earned jail sentences 93% of the time under your court. Defendants with private counsel, just 67% received jail terms for similar accusations. Thapar was now obviously angry, his fists grasping the table edge. I reject the suggestion that I demonstrate prejudice in my courtroom. These figures are taken out of context and don't represent the intricacy of individual circumstances, are they? Taken out of context, Judge? Milian inquired, her tone hardening. Because I have particular instances here. Marcus Williams, defended by a public lawyer, was condemned to 3 years for cocaine possession. 2 months later, Bradley Patterson, private counsel, same charge, same criminal history, sentenced to 18 months probation. Can you explain that difference? The tension in the room was suddenly electrifying. Republican committee members looked uncomfortable. Understanding their candidate was in jeopardy. Democratic members were taking furious notes. Sensing an opening, Thapar sought to retake control. Judge Milian, you're cherry-picking isolated examples without knowing the overall picture. I've based my career on fairness and equal justice under law. Equal justice? Milian's voice raised, for the first time. Judge Thapar, I have here 23 examples from your court, where defendants with public counsel got worse penalties than those with private lawyers for identical offenses. 23 incidents when justice wasn't equal at all. She held up a stack of case files, letting them fall back onto the table with a loud thud that resonated through the hushed room. And that's just from the previous 2 years, she noted. Thapar was now sweating beneath the bright lights, his cool judicial manner breaking. These claims are unjust and baseless. I follow federal sentencing guidelines in every instance. Do you? Milian fired back. Because federal rules allow for judicial discretion, and your discretion tends to favor defendants who can afford expensive counsel. That's not equal justice, Judge Thapar. That's a two-tiered society, where wealth dictates freedom. The room swarmed with hushed talks as reporters feverishly wrote notes. This was no longer a typical confirmation hearing. It had become a trial with Thapar as the defendant, and Milian as both prosecutor and judge. Just when it appeared that Thapar may attempt to deflect with more legal verbiage, Milian delivered the knockout punch that no one expected. Judge Thapar, let me ask you about one more case. Do you remember the case of Sarah Henderson? The question fell like lightning in the hearing chamber. Conservative legal professors who had been taking notes abruptly stopped writing, realizing that something major was about to happen. Republican committee members exchanged anxious looks. Realizing they had no idea where this was leading, Thapar's face grew pale. For the first time since the hearing started, he paused before replying. His hands, which had been resting securely on the table, suddenly grasped the edge as if bracing. himself against an approaching storm. I handle several cases. Judge Marilyn Milian. I don't recollect every name. His voice had lost the commanding tone that had carried him through hours of previous inquiry. Legal analysts, who have witnessed hundreds of confirmation hearings, recognized the signals of a candidate in severe peril. Milian grinned softly, knowing she had him precisely where she wanted him. The grin wasn't victorious or harsh. It was the calm assurance of an attorney who had prepared meticulously and was ready to present the critical evidence. Let me refresh your memories. Sarah Henderson, a single mother of two, was arrested with less than 2 grams of cocaine and no previous record, and was trying to pay rent while working 2 low-wage jobs. She couldn't afford a private counsel, so she was given a public defender who visited with her for precisely 12 minutes before her sentencing hearing. The information struck the room like physical blows. This wasn't abstract legal theory anymore. This was about a genuine individual whose life had been changed by the choices of the guy sitting at the witness table. And progressive activists in the gallery leaned forward, finally hearing the type of concrete accountability they had hoped for. Conservative fans fell back in their chairs, recognizing their candidate was heading into a trap that had been painstakingly designed over weeks of investigation. The room was suddenly utterly hushed, every participant waiting on Milian's remarks. Even experienced reporters who had covered scores of these sessions stopped typing, realizing they were seeing something remarkable. You sentenced Sarah Henderson to 2 years in federal prison. Her children went into foster care. She lost her residence, her employment, everything. Do you remember her now, Judge Thapar? The questions came with surgical precision. Each piece of information added weight to the moral argument Milian was developing against Thapar's record. The human cost of his judicial decisions was no longer veiled behind legal abstractions. Thapar's hands were definitely trembling now. The composed judicial manner he had maintained for hours was breaking under the weight of being faced with the real-world ramifications of his sentencing choices. Every situation is challenging, but I have to obey the law. His words trailed off when he realized how poor his response sounded. The law hadn't forced him to ruin Sarah Henderson's family. His interpretation and execution of that legislation had made that decision. The law? Milian interjected, her voice now filled with controlled rage that had been developing throughout the hearing. Judge, 3 weeks before Sarah Henderson's sentence, you had another case. Michael Brennan III, son of a renowned lawyer, was arrested with 5 grams of cocaine, more than double what Sarah had. Do you recall what sentence you gave him? The analogy was devastating in its simplicity. 2 accused, same offenses, vastly different fates. The only factors were their economic condition and the quality of their legal counsel. Thapar said nothing, peering down at the table as if the answers may be written there. His silence screamed more than any justification he could have provided. You gave Michael Brennan 18 months probation and community service. No jail time. His father hired the greatest criminal defense attorney in the state. So you, Judge Thapar, explain to this committee and to the American people how justice is equal when Sarah Henderson sits in prison and Michael Brennan goes free. The explosion that followed was quick and terrible. Progressive committee members exploded in fury. Conservative members sat in startled silence, thinking their candidate had just been thoroughly exposed. The gallery hummed with astonished murmurs as reporters hurried to fact-check the circumstances of both incidents. Thapar made one final desperate resistance. Judge Marilyn Milian, you're oversimplifying complicated legal matters. There were various conditions. What circumstances? Milian demanded, now standing at her desk. The conditions were that Sarah Henderson was poor and black while Michael Brennan was affluent and white, since they appear to be the only meaningful distinctions between both situations. The committee chairman attempted to call for order, but Milian wasn't finished. "Judge Thapar, you want to speak about respecting the law? Let me read you something." She picked up a paper from her desk. "This is from your own nomination hearing 15 years ago when you declared, and I quote, 'Justice must be blind to wealth, race, and social rank. Every defendant deserves equal treatment under law, regardless of their ability to hire costly attorneys.'" She glanced up from the page, her eyes drilling into Thapar. "Were you lying then, or are you lying now?" The room burst into turmoil. Republican lawmakers complained loudly as Democratic members sought answers. Thapar sat paralyzed, his lips expanding and closing like a fish out of water, unable to produce any intelligible answer. "I have always tried to be fair," he eventually stuttered. "Tried?" Milian's voice pierced through the clamor like a razor. "Judge Thapar's Sarah Henderson is still in jail. Her children are still in foster care. Michael Brennan has entered law school at his father's alma mater. How is that attempting to be fair?" She brought out one last paper, holding it up for everyone to see. "This is a letter from Sarah Henderson written from her jail cell. She wonders whether her children will remember her when she gets out. She asks whether she'll ever be able to reconstruct her life. She questions why justice failed her, yet it protected someone who did the exact same crime." Milian's voice softened, yet remained forceful. "Judge Thapar, can you look me in the eye and tell me that Sarah Henderson got equal justice under law? They couldn't meet her look." After 30 seconds of stillness that seemed like a lifetime, he mumbled, "I followed the guidelines available to me at the time." "No, Judge," Milian responded gently. "You followed 2 separate sets of recommendations, one for folks like Sarah Henderson and another for those like Michael Brennan. That's not justice. That's prejudice with a gavel." The hearing chamber had never been quieter. Conservative legal observers slumped in their chairs, understanding their champion had been thoroughly demolished. Progressive activists wiped away tears, finally witnessing someone fight for individuals like Sarah Henderson. Thapar had entered this hearing as a renowned federal judge en route for advancement. He was departing as a symbol of everything wrong with the American judicial system. The immediate aftermath of Milian's brutal attack on Judge Thapar was unlike anything Washington had seen in recent memory. Within minutes of the hearing finishing, footage of her encounter was rushing around social media channels faster than wildfire. "The party ban Terwin, ein for yon son." #Sarah Henderson's issues started trending inside the first hour, with many Americans expressing their own tales of unfair treatment in the legal system. Legal experts from across the political spectrum were obliged to accept that Milian had shown a serious and worrying trend in Thapar's judicial record. Conservative legal groups that had spent months preparing for Thapar's confirmation found themselves scurrying to defend the indefensible. Their well-constructed talking points about judicial philosophy and constitutional interpretation meant nothing when faced with the harsh reality of Sarah Henderson in jail while Michael Brennan went free. The Heritage Foundation made a statement hoping to save Thapar's nomination. Judge Thapar has served with distinction for 15 years. Individual instances taken out of context should not overshadow his overall record of judicial brilliance, but their case fell hollow when legal experts started scrutinizing Milian's findings more attentively. What she had revealed wasn't an isolated incident or a few cherry-picked ones. It was a recorded trend covering that whole term on the bench. Progressive groups grabbed the occasion. The ACLU issued a thorough study they had been developing for months, exposing widespread inequities in federal sentences based on the quality of legal counsel. Milian's encounter had provided them the ideal stage to expose issues they had been battling for years. Judge Marilyn Milian didn't only expose Judge Thapar, said the director of a human rights group. She revealed the whole system that allows riches to decide judicial outcomes in America. The political repercussions were immediate and far-reaching. Republican senators who had expected to vote for Thar's confirmation began distancing themselves from his candidacy within hours of the hearing's completion. The first to break ranks was Senator Patricia Williams from a purple state, who made a statement stating she wanted time to consider the serious concerns voiced regarding sentencing inequalities. By the next morning, 3 moderate Republicans had stated they would vote against confirmation, thereby ending Thapar's prospects for advancement. Senator David Chen, a generally solid conservative vote, explained his choice in a televised interview. "I cannot in good faith vote to advance a judge whose record provides such strong evidence of differential treatment based on economic position." The defections sent shockwaves across conservative legal circles, who understood that Milian's systematic exposition had fundamentally altered the confirmation equation. Republican leadership found itself in the unenviable position of either defending clear sentence discrepancies or dumping a candidate they had championed for months. Senate Majority Leader Johnson tried damage control with a hurriedly organized news conference. "Judge Thapar has served excellently for 15 years. We will carefully analyze all the facts offered during the hearing before continuing." But political experts observed the cautious phrasing that implied Thapar's nomination was virtually dead. More crucially, for the long term, Milian's performance enhanced her prestige within the Democratic Party overnight. Progressive leaders, who had previously considered her as too inexperienced or pushy, suddenly saw her as a forceful advocate for criminal justice reform who could produce results on the national stage. As former President Obama's top advisor tweeted, "What we observed tonight was more than simply excellent questioning. Judge Marilyn Milian recently showed the whole nation what real responsibility looks like. She's going to be a powerhouse in this party for decades." The plaudits came from unexpected areas as well. Conservative pundit Michael Brooks, who seldom agreed with Democratic ideas, remarked in his blog, "Regardless of your political beliefs, what Judge Marilyn Milian did yesterday should alarm every American who believes in fair justice. She didn't indulge in partisan grandstanding. She offered facts and demanded responsibility." Democratic leadership soon started considering additional positions for Milian on important committees. Within a week, she received requests to join the Democratic leadership's messaging team and was invited to manage a new working group for judicial reform. The media coverage was broad and mainly friendly to Milian, even from sources that frequently targeted progressive leaders. Legal critics commended her preparedness and her ability to articulate complicated legal issues in ways regular Americans could grasp. Her criminal justice concerns. Even conservative websites that traditionally backed Republican judicial candidates difficult to mount an effective defense of that record. The Wall Street Journal's editorial board, while decrying what they termed ambush tactics, admitted that the sentence disparities uncovered during the hearing raised real doubts regarding equal treatment under law. One famous legal expert stated, "Regardless of your political persuasion, what Judge Marilyn Milian uncovered today should alarm every American who believes in fair justice. The discrepancy in punishment depending on legal representation is neither a Republican nor a Democratic problem. It's a basic fairness problem that goes to the core of our constitutional system." The repercussions extend beyond party politics into legal education and practice. Law professors around the nation started integrating excerpts of Milian's questioning into their classes on advocacy and judicial ethics. Her meticulous approach to presenting facts and creating a case became a model for how attorneys should prepare for high-stakes conflicts. Dr. Professor Elena Rodriguez of Columbia Law School provided the complete transcript of Milian's interrogation to her trial advocacy. Students, this is how you ready for a rigorous scrutiny. She didn't depend on gotcha moments or political assaults. She created an irrefutable argument with recorded facts and clear logical development. But the narrative didn't finish with Thapar's unsuccessful candidacy. Milian's study had opened a door that couldn't be closed. Legal advocacy organizations started asking for comparable evaluations of other federal courts, searching for patterns of prejudice in sentencing choices. Within a week, 3 other federal judges drew criticism for similar inequalities. In their courtrooms, the Department of Justice declared it will undertake a thorough review of sentencing. Trends across all federal districts, focusing especially on the influence of legal representation quality on case outcomes. Sarah Henderson, the lady whose tale had become the target of Milian's assault, was given an expedited reconsideration of her case. While legal experts emphasized that her release wasn't certain, the tremendous public attention on her plight prompted it was practically hard for the system to overlook her situation any longer. Thus, the Henderson case became a symbol of what supporters stated was wrong with the present system. A crowdfunding effort to support her children while she remained in prison garnered almost $200,000 in the first week following the hearing. Thousands of Americans who had never heard of Sarah Henderson before Milian's inquiry suddenly knew her tale and sought justice for her circumstances. The Legal Aid Society of Texas declared they will represent Henderson pro gratis in her appeal, with its executive director claiming Sarah Henderson's case reflects hundreds of comparable examples throughout America where economic status decides justice results. We're going to battle not only just her, but for every defendant who has encountered this type of institutional unfairness. The case review uncovered unsettling data concerning Henderson's prior counsel. Her public defender, overburdened with a caseload of over 100 open cases, had actually met with her for just 12 minutes before her sentence hearing. The counsel had not examined possible mitigating considerations, had not contacted character witnesses, and had not produced any alternative sentence suggestions. In contrast, Michael Brennan III's private attorney had spent over 40 hours preparing for his case, engaged a private investigator, met with addiction professionals, and developed a thorough recovery plan that persuaded Judge Thapar to forego jail time completely. This isn't about the quality of individual lawyers, stated Henderson's new legal team. This is about a system that offers dramatically varied degrees of counsel dependent on a defendant's capacity to pay. Sarah Henderson deserved the same kind of advocacy that Michael Brennan got. The publicity surrounding Henderson's decision led to similar assessments in other districts. In Chicago, a federal judge granted a fresh sentence hearing for Maria Rodriguez, whose case revealed parallel tendencies to Henderson's. In Atlanta, the case of Jerome Washington, condemned to 3 years for narcotics possession, while a rich defendant got probation for a greater amount of the same narcotic and became the target of a federal investigation. Meanwhile, John Michael Brennan III, whose case had been used to illustrate the discrepancies in Thapar's sentence, found himself in the focus of unwelcome attention. The young guy, now in his second year of law school, released a statement via his attorney. "I am thankful for the legal counsel I got, but I know that not everyone has access to the same caliber of representation. I support efforts to promote equal justice for all defendants." His father, the eminent attorney who had secured his son's fortunate conclusion, refrained from remarking publicly, although secretly informed colleagues he was evaluating his approach to criminal defense practice. Several lawyers in his business said that the attention from the hearing had inspired them to take up additional pro bono cases for defendants who couldn't afford private legal representation. The larger ramifications stretched beyond individual cases or even particular judges. Milian had succeeded in generating a national discourse regarding the role of wealth in shaping justice outcomes, pushing scholarly issues about structural prejudice into the mainstream political debate. Bar associations around the nation announced fresh steps to address representation discrepancies. The American Bar Association, which has previously focuses mostly on professional growth and ethical training, started a big drive to boost funds for public defense offices and increase pro bono requirements for private lawyers. Enforcement agencies, first dubious of Milian's critique of the legal system, eventually admitted the concern she had observed. The National Sheriff's Association made a statement supporting efforts to guarantee that justice results are based on facts and law, not on the defendant's economic situation. Polling data suggested that Milian's clash with Thapar had resonated much beyond party political boundaries. 78% of Americans believed that offenders should get similar treatment, regardless of whether they have private lawyers or public defenders. Even among conservative voters, 63% supported measures to address sentencing inequalities. The political effect on Milian herself was profound and far-reaching. She got lecture invitations from law schools, civil rights organizations, and political parties around the nation. Her congressional office reported receiving hundreds of calls from young attorneys wondering how they might help her efforts on criminal justice reform. "I've been practicing law for 20 years, remarked one criminal defense attorney from Philadelphia. "And I've never seen somebody communicate the faults with our system as plainly as Judge Marilyn Milian did in the hearing chamber." She gave voice to every public defender who has seen their clients suffer harsher sentences merely because they couldn't afford better representation. The reaction from young lawyers was especially overwhelming. Recent law school graduates who had been exploring corporate legal jobs started reaching out to public defense agencies, motivated by Milian's illustration of how legal activism may achieve genuine change. The National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers reported a 40% increase in applications to their public service fellowship programs in the month after the hearing. Legal recruiting companies identified an unusual pattern of associates at prominent law firms, demanding transfers to pro bono departments or seeking reduced-hour agreements that would enable them to take on more public interest matters. The Milian effect, as one recruiter described it, was changing career objectives. Throughout the legal profession, 2 law schools reported significant demand in clinical programs that offered direct representation to destitute defendants. The University of Texas Law School, Milian's alma mater, saw applications to their criminal defense clinic spike by 300% for the following semester. "What Judge Marilyn Milian proved," said Professor Lisa Chen, who supervises the clinic, "is that a public defense job isn't simply about aiding particular individuals. It's about confronting systematic inequalities that impact millions of Americans." She's inspired a new generation of attorneys to consider this task as both personally important and professionally prestigious. The ripple effects continuing to permeate across the legal community. 3 states stated they will initiate inspections of their own state. Judicial systems searching for comparable patterns of prejudice in local courts. Colorado, Massachusetts, and Oregon each committed considerable funds for detailed research of sentencing disparities in their state court systems. Legal aid groups reported increased contributions and volunteer applications from individuals. Influenced by Milian's activism, the Texas Legal Aid Foundation saw donations climb by 60% in the 2 months after the hearing, with many contributors particularly noting Milian's inquiry as their basis for contributing corporately. Law firms usually focused on high-paying commercial lawsuits, started announcing larger pro bono commitments. 3 major foreign businesses committed to taking up the defense of impoverished defendants in federal criminal proceedings, with partners noting that Milian's hearing had pushed them to address the fact of uneven representation in the justice system. The American College of Trial Lawyers, one of the most respected legal organizations in the nation, requested Milian to present their annual ethics lecture. The invitation was unusual for a sitting member of Congress and represented the legal community's awareness of her effect on issues regarding judicial impartiality and advocacy excellence. For Judge Thapar, the fallout was immediate and definitive. 2 days after the hearing, he withdrew his candidacy for promotion, claiming personal reasons and a wish to continue serving in my present role. Legal observers saw this as an acknowledgement that his confirmation was unattainable. After Milian's disastrous exposé of his record, the withdrawal statement provided by his counsel was strikingly short and defensive. Judge Thapar remains devoted to fair and unbiased justice. He looks forward to continuing his excellent work on the federal bench. The statement pointedly excluded any recognition of the sentencing discrepancies Milian had documented. Behind the scenes, fans were upset at what they considered as an ambush. Conservative legal groups had committed substantial political capital in his candidacy, and his departure left them scurrying to find an alternate candidate who could endure such scrutiny. The Federalist Society, which had championed Thapar's elevation, found itself undertaking urgent examinations of additional prospective candidates' records. For the first time in decades, conservative legal organizations were obliged to scrutinize not only judicial doctrine, but also actual sentencing practices. When vetting applicants, more importantly, Thapar indicated he would be applying new standards in his courtroom to guarantee more uniform sentencing processes. The amendments included obligatory recording of variables used in sentencing decisions and frequent statistical evaluations of sentencing trends. While some felt this was too little too late, it marked a recognition that Milian's objections had substance. The new procedures triggered tremors across the federal system, as other judges, anticipating similar scrutiny, started proactively assessing their own sentencing policies. Court officials reported unusual numbers of judges asking for a data study of their prior rulings, a hitherto unheard-of procedure in the generally isolated federal judicial system. Thapar's quotation, "peers on the appeals court," separated themselves from his dubious past. 3 judges, who had earlier recommended him for advancement, secretly retracted their approvals, with one indicating privately that they had been ignorant of the sentence discrepancies in his trial court work. Legal ethics specialists started utilizing Thapar's case as a teaching tool for continuing education classes needed for all government judges. The Federal Judicial Center indicated they will include data of sentence discrepancies into their yearly training sessions, guaranteeing that all judges would be exposed to the challenges Milian had presented. The long-term repercussions for American politics were as substantial. Milian has shown that comprehensive preparedness and brave advocacy might yet win against political calculation and institutional power. Her success spurred a new generation of progressive politicians to concentrate on actual policy work rather than merely partisan rhetoric. What Judge Marilyn Milian demonstrated tonight, noted one political pundit, is that Americans are yearning for leaders who will fight for genuine people confronting real difficulties. She didn't only earn political points, she perhaps altered someone's life and uncovered structural flaws that impact millions of Americans. The incident of Judge Thapar's unsuccessful nomination became a case study in law schools and political science programs over the nation. Students assessed Milian's research methodology, her questioning style, and her ability to convey difficult legal matters in language that resonated with everyday Americans. Turistua, but arguably the most significant effect was the message Milian had delivered to future judicial candidates. The days of floating through confirmation hearings without being held responsible for real-world implications of court rulings were over. Future candidates would need to be prepared to address challenging questions about how their judgments impacted real individuals, not simply abstract legal principles. As one legal ethics scholar highlighted, Judge Marilyn Milian has profoundly modified the confirmation procedure. No longer can judges hide behind legal language when their judgments demonstrate evident patterns of prejudice. She set the bar for what responsibility looks like in our legal system. The metamorphosis was complete. A routine confirmation hearing had become a watershed event in American politics, all because one judge refused to believe that justice should rely on the amount in your financial account. Thanks for viewing this fantastic political showdown, where preparedness met opportunity and justice found its voice. Judge Marilyn Milian didn't simply shut down a judge. She revealed a system and transformed the discussion about equal justice in America. Make sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories on the political struggles that are transforming our democracy. The battle for fair justice is far from ended, and leaders like Milian are just getting started.